And they noticed that the Jewish people were multiplying much faster than the Egyptian population, and that began a fear that the Jewish people might become so multiple that they'll become a threat to the Egyptian population. And so they begin a two-phase policy to try to reduce the Jewish population. The first policy is that they will put the Jews to very hard labor, extreme labor, so when the men get home, they'll simply be too tired to have relationships with their wives and therefore not produce so many Jewish children. But they underestimated Jewish energy. And the Jewish people continue to multiply. So in verse 15 onward, there is a new policy effected, and that is to inform the Jewish midwives that when the birth is about to be born, they should notice if the child is a female, then she can live, but the child is a male, that male should be killed before the child comes out of the womb. That's called post-abortion killing. And however, these Jewish midwives who would not disobey the Lord, and therefore they simply tell Pharaoh, by the time to get there, the Jewish women are a bit more lively, and they produce the child before they get there. And so now Pharaoh issues a new policy. In verse 22, he now instructs all of the Egyptian people to scout around. If they find a newborn baby boy among the Jewish people, they should take the boy and drown it in the Nile River. Because it was happening in this chapter, Egypt has a very unique distinction. The first nation is the oldest anti-Semitic nation in Israel's history. It's also the first nation to attempt genocide, the total annihilation of the Jewish people. And the method of Egypt is to kill the sons. And the means by which these Jewish sons were killed was by means of drowning. And in this way, the curse of Egypt has been laid down against the people of Israel. Now, God waits a long time before he begins any work of intervention. But now skip over to chapter 4. And we're looking at verses 22 to 23. About 2 centuries, up to 2.25 centuries, the Jewish people have been suffering this type of enslavement. And as a result, they may have begun giving up on this God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but the principle we learn here is that sometimes God seems to wait an awful long time before he fulfills his promises. Eventually, every promise is fulfilled, and fulfilled to the letter of that promise. And so God now begins his work of intervention in chapter 4, verses 22 and 23. He tells Moses to tell Pharaoh, Israel is my son, my firstborn. I have said unto you, let my son go that he may serve me. You have refused to let him go, therefore I will slay your son, your firstborn. And you'll see the principle of curse for curse in kind. And when God sends the 10th plague, what was the plague? The curse against Israel was the death of the sons of Israel, and now God will slay the firstborn son of every Egyptian family. Thus curse for curse in kind. But it does not stop there, because the means by which these Jewish sons were killed was by means of drowning. When the Jews finally leave the land of Egypt, Pharaoh begins to send his army against the Jews. And how does God deal with the Egyptian army? Also by means of drowning. That's curse for curse in kind. And so that the method of trying to destroy the Jews has failed. Now move to chapter 17. Not long after the Exodus, another nation called Amalek moves in with its own method of trying to destroy the Jews. We read in verse 8, Then came Amalek and warred with Israel in Rephidim. Amalek's methods declare war upon the Jews. Let's skip down to verse 16. And he said, Jehovah hath sworn, Jehovah hath war with Amalek from generation to generation. Notice the curse for curse and kind principle. In verse 8, Amalek declared war upon the Jews, and now in verse 16, God declares war upon Amalek. Curse for curse and kind. And once again, he waits a very long time before he brings the war to an end. The war begins here. It continues all the way to 1 Samuel chapter 15. 1 Samuel chapter 15. And when Saul becomes the first king of Israel, this first king of Israel is not given a specific commission to bring the war to a close. So verses 1, 2, and 3 of chapter 15 of 1 Samuel, Saul is instructed to go to where the Amalekites were now located and destroy every one of them, including the livestock and so on. And Saul goes out to do just that. But as he goes out to do just that, he runs into one small problem. Because four centuries earlier, when the Amalekites cursed the Jews, another nation known as the Kenites, at that same point of history, had blessed the Jews. So you have two peoples, one under the curse and one under the blessing. And the problem was, at this point of history, the Kenites who were under the blessing lived mixed among the Amalekites who were under the curse. In those days, when you have a full battle on a contact-to-contact type war, you didn't have to stop to ask for identification papers or passports or ID cards. That's a problem he faces, but it's a problem he solves. Let's skip down to verse 5. And Saul came to the city of Amalek and laid wait in the valley. And Saul said to the Kenites, "Go, depart, get you away from among the Amalekites, lest I destroy you with them." And why? "For ye showed kindness to all the people, to all the children of Israel, when they came up out of Egypt, and so the Kenites departed from among the Amalekites." So notice in one chapter you can see both facets of the Abrahamic covenant, the blessing, cursing facets working their way out in the history of two nations because of actions by these nations, not just recently of this time, but 4 centuries earlier. And again, suffering the curse for curse in kind principle on the Amalekites by war. We'll now go to a book that displays that principle rather well, and that's the book of Esther.